and in this tutorial I'm going to talk about integration testing. Okay, so what is the integration testing actually? If you've followed my previous lecture videos, I covered a lot of important concepts about unit testing, and unit testing where we test our lot of logics, right? But there is also a situation in which you have to test the UI, right? Because actually UI is the point where you update your view, okay, that the user is viewing it, is viewing it. So to test the UI, and with the logic, okay, we have to use this integration testing. Okay, so integration testing is pretty much like testing your entire flow or user experience. Okay, so this is what we are doing here. Uh, so actually the idea is like you are testing to ensure that your different components with your application integrate each very well with your logic, and so that means your Android components, UI components integrate pretty much well with your logical components that you are coding, okay, in your application. So some of the example are like ensuring that your API related components parse the data well and interact well with your storage components. The storage components are capable of storing and retrieving the data correctly. The UI components load and display the appropriate data. Okay, so it's everything is the sequence of flow is something like that. Okay, so the transition between your different screens in your application is pretty working fine. So it's pretty much like your user experience test is called a integration test. Okay, so actually for your integration test there is a kind of a pattern that we follow. This is called integration testing pattern, which is in the format of given, when, and then. So one of the example is, as you can see here, given I'm not logged in and I open the app. When I enter my credentials and I click login, then I see my home page. Okay, so this is kind of a scenario. It's like a user experience scenario that you are trying to test, in integration testing. So it's pretty a vast concept. Okay, so it's like it's testing your pretty much like your entire UI. Okay, and obviously it is like not so much, because integration testing just covers 20% of your entire source code. Okay, so unit test covered like 70%, integration test consisted of just 20%, and UI test that we will be learning later on, which will cover just 10%. Okay, it's like it's very less cover coverage, but it's really important, because it will help you to decide, like check your user experience. Okay, and there are actually two libraries to do integration testing. One is a Robolectric, and another one is a Expresso. Expresso is pretty much your kind of like you are trying to, the only difference between Robolectric and Expresso is like Robolectric you are trying to execute the integration test without the need of your actual device or emulator, whereas in Expresso the you really need an Android device or emulator to run your test, right? So now in this tutorial I'm going to explain more about the Robolectric actually. So this Robolectric library is an open source library, which is actually meant to give users the ability to unit test classes from the Android framework like activity and fragment as part of their local test. Okay, so instead of the like UI testing. So actually also recently Google has endorsed this library Robolectric, and has been integrated in Android X Jetpack components. So one of the benefit of this library is the simplicity of testing activities and fragments. So this is a benefit which comes to integration test, because we can use this feature to make sure that our components integrate well with each other, right? So some of the Robolectric features are the possibility to instantiate and test the activity and fragment lifecycle, the possibility to view inflation, to test the view inflation, the possibility to provide the configuration to different Android APIs, orientation, screen sizes, layout, direction, and so on. The possibility to change the application class, which then helps to change the modules to permit data mux to be inserted. Okay, so now let's implement this Robolectric. What you need to do to implement the Robolectric is, first you have to just implement the necessary library. Obviously we are using a test implementation because it's the integration testing. And then the second thing is like we will try to now understand the scenario and implement the testing scenario for this. Okay, so what we have, actually we have a class called text formatter. We have a class called factorial generator, which generates the factorial text formatter that takes the factorial result and convert it to the format the text and assign it to the string, right? Use the text formatter to assign the value. And then we have a simple activity called Robolectric activity. This activity actually consists of actually a edit text, a button, and a text view. If you write any value, right, for example 5, you find the factorial and the result is 120, right, as you can see here. So this is the application. Okay, so actually our motivation of this tutorial is used to use Robolectric to run this user experience test, UI test, and not the UI. Let's say let's do the integration test, and try to find to check if the values are pretty much correct, and like the correct the UI is actually updating the correct value, right? So this is our motivation. So don't get confused with actually UI testing and unit testing. It's like unit like integration testing, because like it seems very similar because we are pretty much using, but actually there is some slight difference because we are not actually properly testing the UI. We are just testing the user experience. That means you are testing the updating of the view, okay, if it is updated with the right data or not. Okay, so that is our real motivation. So okay, so now let's write the test for this Robolectric activity. Just click here, create a test, Robolectric activity test. We are gonna create this test class. Obviously it's gonna lie on Android test. Okay, and voila guys, so we have test, and we will now write the test for this scenario. So what is our scenario? Our scenario is pretty much we have to show factorial result in text view, right? We have to try to test this scenario. Okay, let's import it. Okay, so what is our scenario here? The scenario that we are testing is our main like our this factor Robolectric activity. So we launch our Robolectric activity, Robolectric activity. Okay, let's import launch, and then we have our scenario that move to state lifecycle dot lifecycle, not the glide manager lifecycle, but it's import the Android X lifecycle. Okay, so state resumed, and then our scenario on activity on this activity is like activity. So what we have to do is activity find view by id, edit text dot id dot okay, so I'm not able to get the id, so let's get the necessary imports. the imports. Okay, so it's edit text, then we set the text. Okay, let's try to run with this simple input of 5. Then we have an activity that find view by id. It's a button. Okay, so what we are gonna do, id dot button rb button, we're gonna perform the click. Okay, and then we have to assert now with the values like context get okay, so here we are missing something, that is our context. Well, context is a get application context with our application. Let's import also this one, and get the string and string dot result, and we have to format using a string formatter. The right value will be 120, right? So activity find view by id r, okay, it's like r dot id dot text view dot text. Okay, so this is we are trying to assert, right? Text view, this is the result that is expected, and this is the result that is actually okay in this in the text view. So we're gonna test this, right? So also obviously we have to also run with the JUnit Android JUnit 4 runner, run with the Android JUnit 4 class thus runner. Okay, now let's try to run this test. Okay, let's check this. Launch is succeeded. Okay, yeah, we are able to run this test, and it successfully passed. As you can see here, it successfully passed, and the test is was successful. Okay, so this is the scenario how we can, this is like the whole entire flow how we can use Robolectric to test to do integration testing. Okay, and there was not necessary of using emulator, like, right? So it's pretty, that's the benefit of using Robolectric. So as you can see, we use this, just be careful that we are using this Android JUnit 4 runner, test runner. This will set up the Robolectric and create the necessary configuration. So while the launch method here, this one will return a scenario object. So it will return this scenario object as our obviously our activity that we are testing, and we then okay, implement our necessary conditions, like, right, we get this our scenario, then on this our scenario we try to play with this play with the scenario, and then assert it finally with the if the value of depth, right? And okay, so this is it. And finally, so we can also, okay, let me give you some extra concepts, like you can actually also if you want to add configuration to your test, we can also use config annotation button for your class. Okay, so and another important concept is, like, for example, you can also use for example, if you want to test fragments, so how can you test it? You have to implement the Android fragment testing. Okay, like this library for using fragment testing and test implementation, test as espresso core. Yeah, so you have to actually implement these two libraries if you want to do fragment testing. Okay, in Robolectric for actually creating the fragment scenario, and obviously to create the fragment scenario, the steps are pretty similar. You just, instead of creating your activity, you just need to uh, fragment scenario. You can launch fragment launch fragment fragment in contain. Oh, actually we have to sync, right? Sorry guys. Container this situation. Fragment fragment in container. Actually let me rebuild the project guys to see if my library is being imported, and then you pass your fragments right here, the name of the fragment or any fragment, right? My compo, like my sports fragment, okay, you know, like. But the sad thing is I'm not able to get this import yeah, fragment scenario. Let me see why fragment testing. Okay, let me clean the project. Okay guys, sometimes there can be a problem with the import fragment Android X launch fragment container. Yeah, actually, you know, like there is a problem with the Android X fragment testing. Maybe Android X test Espresso. Maybe I'm just using the wrong version. Let me just sync the version. No guys, this is like ridiculous, right? I guess like we have the problem with the fragment scenario. Okay, so launch fragment. Okay guys, actually it's confirmed that there is some kind of a problem. We don't have a fragment scenario actually, just the activity scenario. So I suggest you just use the activity scenario for the moment. And as we can see that there is an error with the fragment scenario right now, but there can be a possibility of using also a fragment testing that we will be discussing in it in the upcoming lectures. Thank you guys.